There are moments you still carry, not big ones. Not the dramatic turning points people talk about at dinner tables. Small ones. A conversation that ended strangely. A kind word said at exactly the right time. A specific afternoon years ago that probably meant nothing to anyone else in it. You remember these with a detail that surprises even you. The exact words. The pause before someone answered. The way the room felt. And somewhere along the way, you may have wondered whether that is normal. Whether most people live with this same quiet archive. Or whether something about the way your mind holds things is different. It is different. And there are good reasons for it. Introversion is not simply shyness. It is not just a preference for quiet rooms or smaller gatherings. It describes something more fundamental. A particular way the mind takes in and processes experience. One way of thinking about this, drawn from personality psychology, is that introverts tend to process incoming information more thoroughly before moving on. Where an extrovert might engage quickly and broadly, an introvert often slows down and goes deeper, not because they are slower, but because depth is where they naturally operate. And here's where memory enters the picture. Memory is not a recording device. It is not a camera that captures what is in front of us and stores it untouched. Memory is something that gets built, shaped by emotion, attention, and meaning. The more thoroughly an experience is processed, the more richly it tends to be remembered. For someone whose inner world is active and whose attention tends inward, this has a particular effect. One that often goes completely unnoticed, even by the person experiencing it. That is what this video is about. When something happens to an introvert, it does not simply pass through. It gets turned over, considered, connected to something else. This kind of internal processing, the quiet, almost automatic mulling that introverts do, is exactly what tends to produce more durable memories. The more you engage with an experience, the more connections you build around it. And more connections generally means easier recall. You might notice this happening after a conversation ends. You replay it. You think about what was said, what might have been meant, what you did not catch in the moment. That is not a bad habit. That is your mind doing what it naturally does, building a richer version of the experience than a surface impression would give you. The result is memory with more texture, more dimension, and more staying power. There is a widely observed connection between emotional experience and memory. When something carries emotional weight, the mind tends to hold it differently, more completely, with more staying power than a neutral event would have. Introverts often report feeling things with a certain depth, not always expressively, not always visibly, but internally. A quiet reaction that does not show on the surface but registers fully within. What this seems to mean for memory is that even ordinary moments can leave a stronger impression. A kind word during a hard week. A piece of music playing at exactly the right time. A brief exchange that somehow mattered more than its size suggested. Many introverts quietly feel that they remember emotional experiences more vividly than those around them. That something from years ago can still carry its original feeling. This is not sentimentality. It is simply what tends to happen when someone processes experience at depth. There is a particular quality of attention that many introverts carry without thinking much about it. It does not always point toward the main event, the loudest thing in the room, the obvious center. It drifts toward the edges. The small specific detail that somehow says more than the big picture does. The slight tension in someone's voice that did not match their words. The way an atmosphere in a room shifted when a topic changed. The detail that no one else seemed to register. Since memory can only work with what attention gives it, introverts often end up holding memories that are more layered, more atmospherically complete. The kind of recall that includes not just what happened, but what it felt like to be there. It is rarely announced. But ask an introvert what they remember about a shared experience. Really ask, and the specificity can be surprising, even to the people who were there alongside them. There is something worth noting about what happens when introverts spend time alone. The quiet hours, a walk, a slow morning, the time before sleep are not simply downtime. Something is happening in them. Experience needs space to settle. The mind revisits what it has encountered. It makes connections. It finds meaning in things that felt incomplete in the moment. And for introverts, who tend to seek solitude not just to rest but to think, this process happens regularly and thoroughly. You might find that experiences only fully land after you have had time alone with them. That a conversation or event does not make complete sense until later, until you have had the chance to sit with it quietly and let it resolve. That is not delay, that is how your mind actually works. And it tends to produce a kind of understanding that is slower to arrive but harder to lose. Introverts tend to maintain an active inner life, an ongoing private conversation with their own thoughts, memories, and ideas. And there is an interesting side effect of this. When you return to a memory and thought, when you revisit it, turn it over, see it from a slightly different angle, you reinforce it. You keep it from fading. Not through effort, but simply because your mind naturally goes back there. For someone who spends a meaningful portion of their inner life in reflection, this means that important memories are being quietly reinforced over time, not as a deliberate practice, just as a natural consequence of how an introverted mind moves through its own interior. The inner world is not a place you retreat to. For many introverts, it is the primary place you live, and it keeps unusually careful records. Introverts often hold detailed, lasting memories of people who have mattered to them. The specific way a friend used to phrase things, how a parent sounded when they were worried, the quality of a relationship that no longer exists in the same form. This is not the same as being unable to let go. It is something quieter. It is having genuinely paid attention, having been present in a way that left a real impression. Sometimes this means carrying the weight of remembering people more fully than they remember you, of holding the specifics of something the other person has long since moved past. That asymmetry can feel lonely if you let yourself think about it. But it also points to something real about how introverts show up for the people in their lives, with a kind of attention that most people never quite articulate and do not always notice until it is gone. It would be dishonest to talk about all of this as though it were only a gift. The same tendencies that make beautiful memories vivid can make difficult ones slower to release. A harsh word, a moment of rejection, something said carelessly by someone whose opinion mattered. These can return with more detail and feeling than a lighter processor might experience. This is not a character flaw, it is the same quality operating in a different direction. A mind that holds things carefully does not get to choose which things it holds carefully. What that often calls for is a kind of learned patience with yourself. The ability to notice when you are replaying something difficult and ask, not with frustration, but with genuine curiosity, what that experience might still need from you. Sometimes it needs more thought. Sometimes it simply needs more time. And sometimes, slowly and without force, it is possible to let it rest. There is a final thread worth naming. Introverts often have a particular relationship with their own past, not as nostalgia exactly, but as reference. Memory, for many introverts, is not about living in what was. It is about understanding who they are now. The ability to draw on a rich inner archive, to notice patterns across time, to recognize how something familiar has appeared before, to feel the weight of experience that actually accumulated, that is part of where the introvert's self-awareness tends to come from. It is why introverts often read situations with a quiet clarity that others find difficult to explain. They have been paying attention for a long time, and they remember what they noticed. That is not magic. It is the product of a mind that takes experience seriously. It is worth pausing here for a moment. If you have been told at some point that you think too much, that you are too sensitive, that you hold on to things longer than you should, those words can settle in a person. They can start to feel like a verdict. What this video has tried to offer is a different frame for the same set of facts. That the way your mind works, the depth, the retention, the quiet processing is not an excess to be managed. It is a coherent way of operating. One with real costs, but also with real value. The world tends to reward speed. It values the person who moves quickly and does not look back. And introverts, whose processing is slower and less visible, sometimes absorb the idea that something is broken in how they function. There is nothing broken here. The fact that you remember what others have forgotten is not a sign that you are too much inside your own head. It is a sign that you are actually present. That what was happening around you had the chance to land, not just pass through. That is worth something. It always has been. Here's what I would leave you with. Understanding why you remember the way you do can change your relationship with your own mind. Not by fixing anything, but by making sense of something that may have felt unexplained for a long time. When you know that depth of processing is both a source of richness and a source of sensitivity, you can approach yourself with a little more patience. You can notice when something difficult is lingering and ask what it still needs. You can also recognize more clearly maybe than you did before the genuine value in the way you hold things. The conversations you have kept in memory, the people you actually saw, the small moments of beauty that walked past everyone else and stayed with you. That is not a small thing. In a world that tends to move on quickly, there is something quietly important about a mind that holds experience with care. You have always known that about yourself. Now you have a few more words for why. Thank you for spending some of your quiet time here, and I've something in this felt like it was speaking directly to you. It was